Welcome. I'm Pastor James Richards of New Horizons Missions. Today we're going to be continuing our study of the wonderful parable of Jesus called the Prodigal Son. You will remember that the wastrel son has just been welcomed home by his father. Now we'll see what happens when the father's eldest son, in other words, the brother, hears the good news. So let's read today's scriptures from Luke chapter 15, verse 25. Meanwhile, the oldest son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and would not go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time, you never even gave me one young goat for a feast with my friends. This is the word of the Lord. Now, you remember that scene where Jesus was talking to the sinners and the Pharisees in that crowd. This is where the parable was presented. But he's also speaking to you and I through these holy scriptures. And what is his message? That God will always welcome sinners back into his fellowship. That's the message. It doesn't matter what we've done. If we turn our back on our sinful life and seek him with a repentant and humble heart, he will welcome us back. And this is the key point, that instead of being punished for our transgressions or sins, we will be reinstated and treated with love and compassion. It's the same for a nation. 2 Chronicles 7:14 tells us, then if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and restore their land. So this is a parable that is not only for individual sinners, but for nations as well. Do you remember the prophet Jonah? Now, we sort of usually think about the miracle of his being swallowed by a giant fish and then living to tell the tale. But the purpose of the book of Jonah isn't to tell us about him being gobbled up by a whale, but to tell us about God's warnings and judgment that he was about to fall on Nineveh, and how God sent Jonah to warn them and to tell them if they didn't turn away from their wicked ways, then he would destroy them. It's just exactly what he did with Sodom and Gomorrah. Do you remember that story? Was Nineveh destroyed? No. They repented of their sins and God gave them another chance, which is why it's very similar to the parable of the prodigal son. The prodigal son is a perfect picture of God's forgiveness and fatherly love, not only to us, but to our nation as well. Our return from sin will be a time of great joy and celebration, as God is overjoyed that we are not continuing down the path to eternal destruction. So that day, 2,000 years ago, there would have, standing around Jesus, there would have been sinners in that crowd as well. Some would have reacted to this parable, I'm sure, by turning to God for forgiveness so they could get back into fellowship. Sadly, most of them would choose to continue their sinful lives and continue in their paths to certain destruction. But now we turn to an equally important lesson that Jesus added to this parable. The reaction of the eldest son when he hears that his wayward brother has returned. Jesus here is making a pointed jab at the Pharisees and the other self-righteous Jews who were listening to his every word and criticizing him at the same time. They were adhering to the law in every way, which is good, you'd think, but they didn't understand that the law's goal was to prepare their hearts to love God and to love their neighbors as themselves. As Jesus described them in Matthew 23:27, I love this verse. How terrible for you, teachers of the law and the Pharisees. You are hypocrites. You are like tombs that are painted white. Outside, those tombs look fine. They look beautiful. But inside, they are full of the bones of dead people and all kinds of unclean things. You've all been to the cemeteries and you've seen some of those tombs. They're, about 4 foot off the ground, and they're about 7 foot, 8 foot long, and they're all whitewashed, and they look beautiful and glistening in the sun. They look beautiful. But if you were to break open one of those tombs, you'd find something horrible inside, crawly things and the bones of dead people. It would not be a pretty sight. It looks good on the outside, but inside it's really bad. And that is, of course, is a comparison that Jesus is making to the Pharisees. They look great on the outside, but break them open and they're full of all that horrible stuff. Jesus was teaching them that just doing the right thing is not enough. It's what's in our hearts that is important to God. It's not just talking the talk. It's also about walking the walk. We can look holy and righteous, but our hearts can be lacking in love and compassion. And that's something that God only knows. Luke 15, verse 25, meanwhile, the oldest son was in the fields working. Now, the eldest son worked hard, obeyed his father, and had never brought any disgrace to his family. He seemed like the perfect son. Even now, at this moment, he's out working hard, doing the right thing. But this is a carefully crafted picture of a legalistic Jew or a legalistic Christian, determined to obtain salvation by keeping the law. These legalistic Jews and Christians did not understand the teaching of the Old Testament, which is summed up in what we call the gospel. Romans 1:17 has a great summary. This good news, the gospel, tells us how God makes us right in his sight. This is accomplished from start to finish by faith. As the scriptures say, it is through faith that a righteous person has life, not through works, but by faith. So a person can talk like a Christian, speak like a Christian, have all the Christian degrees and qualifications imaginable, but still not be a believer, not be a Christian, not be saved in the eyes of God. And that's whose eyes are all critical in these matters. I'm sure you've all met people just like that. They have everything in their heads, but are dead in their hearts. Continuing with the parable. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return. Now we're about to learn that this son had suppressed his resentment of his younger brother for all the years since he departed. He was probably thinking, why am I the fool who has to work day and night on the family farm while Junior is out having a wild time with booze and drugs and wild women? Although he had demonstrated greater maturity and wisdom than his sibling, he was also a bit jealous. We can imagine that he'd heard the rumors of his brother's financial ruin and poverty stricken life, and he would have felt a little bit smug, wouldn't he? Oh, how the mighty have fallen, he would have laughed quietly to himself. But now, like a bad penny, his brother was back. Not only was he back, but in his mind, his father was wasting time and money on him and treating him like a returning war hero instead of the dismal failure he was in reality. He thought to himself, "This is unbelievable." Can you empathize with this hard-working, responsible brother? Well, I know that I can. I can. Verse 28, the older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, "All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends." You see, just like the Pharisees, the older brother was defining behavior by outward actions, not inward attitudes. The older brother is saying here that he was the one worthy of the celebration, and his father had been ungrateful for all of his work. Now the one who had squandered his money was getting what he, the better, more faithful older son, what he deserved. We can read into his behavior that the oldest son's focus was on himself. And as a result, there was no joy in his brother's arrival home. He is so consumed with issues of justice and equity that he fails to see the value of his brother's repentance and return. He really wants to see his brother punished for his obvious shortcomings. But this is the message that we're getting from this wonderful parable. That's not how God treats returning sinners. And neither should we. 1 John 2:11 tells us, "But anyone who hates his brother is still living and walking in darkness. Such a person does not know the way to go, having been blinded by the darkness." We're told clearly that this is much celebration. There's a lot of celebration when a sinner is returned to the safety of the sheepfold. Luke 15:7, we had that in the very first part of this parable. In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. Listen, there is never, ever, never punishment for a person or a nation who repents and seeks forgiveness. Instead of the punishment due, there is a grand celebration and lots of joy. Now, this is the end of part 3 of the parable of the prodigal son. Make sure you listen to part 4, where you'll hear the incredible end of this parable. So God bless you and keep you safe.